أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Dear brothers and sisters, dear Sheikh Ahmed Haneef, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, everyone is keeping well. Thank you to everyone for joining us for the second session of this four-part series entitled Am I Racist? Inshallah. And for those of you that were here last week, we were also joined by Sheikh Ahmed Haneef, who we once again thank very dearly for joining us at quite short notice last week and for delivering what was a wonderful, a very, very frank and at times, pretty kind of eye-opening discussion, but one from which I'm sure all of us, including myself, learnt a great deal. So inshallah, today will be the second session. The topic is racism in the past and present era. And again, I will leave this to Sheikh to discuss. He is one of the preeminent scholars and experts in this area within the English-speaking Shia world, and we couldn't have been joined by anyone better than Sheikh Ahmed Haneef. So for those of you that perhaps missed last week or have maybe not heard the Sheikh speak before, just a brief introduction to Sheikh. So Sheikh Ahmed Haneef is a Canadian now residing in the UK. He attended York University and McMaster University. While at university, he was involved in the Black Power struggles in the 1970s and the anti-racism and anti-apartheid struggles of the 1980s. He accepted Islam in 1982 and subsequently left Canada to pursue Islamic studies at one of the traditional seats of higher learning in the holy city of Qom in Iran. He has been studying in Qom for over 12 weeks, where he has graduated in the higher Islamic subjects, and his main subjects are fiqh, principles of law, tafsir, Islamic history, irfan, and Islamic philosophy. He's written and published a number of articles on Islam and was also directly involved in editing and correcting an English translation of Tafsir al-Mizan, originally written by Allama Tabatabai. Sheikh Haneef is an internationally sought after lecturer and has taken part in several meaningful international conferences. At the same time, he is first and foremost a grassroots activist and worker involved in the day-to-day affairs of Muslim youth, converts and oppressed peoples in North America and Africa. At present, he is a member of staff at the Islamic Center of England. So once again, thank you very, very much for joining us today, Sheikh Ahmed Haneef. And just once again, just to run through the format of the program, inshallah, Sheikh will be delivering his presentation, after which we will open the floor for Q&A. The main ways you can ask Q&A or ask your questions, number one would be to raise your hand. There is this feature, inshallah, should be at the bottom of your screen. If you raise your hand, the host will unmute you and you can ask your question through your mic. Or secondly, you may use the Q&A function at the bottom. We'd ask that you please, rather than using the chat, please do use the Q&A function, as all the questions are in the area and it'll be easier for the hosts and also for Sheikh to keep track of, inshallah. And without further ado, I'd like to please hand over to Sheikh Ahmed Haneef. Could we please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj.
First of all, I wasn't expecting the brother to read all of that stuff, but thank you anyway. Today is my last talk, and I hope that in covering this the topic of racism, past and present, to end up with where do we go from here? What can we do as a community? When we look at racism in the past and in the present, racism in the past lacked one very important feature that racism in the present does. Racism in the past was not an essentialist kind of racism, meaning that the race or the people that one looked down upon as a people were not really seen in the sense of there is something materially deficient about that people, or even intellectually deficient of that people. If you take the Roman Empire, for example, the Roman Empire integrated into its upper classes people from conquered environments. As long as you became a citizen of Rome, you were equal to another Roman. Septimus Severus, for example, is a Roman emperor who is an African from Africa, you know. And this is quite important. Racism today is a combination of both. It's a combination of both. It's a combination of this type of attitude and or, because it could be complex sometimes, an essentialist attitude towards race. An essential attitude towards race, where a people who are judged as inferior are inferior because of their very being itself. Their very being itself is inferior. You see, and this is the attitude that really defines racism. And to explain that, to justify it, you know, they resort to Darwinism, and they also resort to a kind of scientism. You know, so you'd find that, you know, you had some tests for race that could vary from, let's say, the word escapes me now, but it's measuring your cranium and the different bulges on the cranium itself, to sticking, like what they did in apartheid South Africa, sticking a pencil in somebody's hair, and if the pencil does not fall out, then that person is a black person. Okay, it went from that extreme to that extreme. Okay, even today, okay, we have professors in psychology that talk about intellectual deficiencies and so on of black people and so forth with respect to race, okay? And classify intelligence on the basis of white races, oriental races, and black races. You know, you have that kind of stuff going on even today. This is the kind of essentialist racism. So this is the difference between the two. You know, so you'd find, for example, that racism, let's say in the Middle East or in the East in general, okay, would be a kind of racism like that. You know, where, let's say, I mean, I'm not justifying this, where the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist regime, has as one of its policies the assimilation of the Uyghur people. They make them disappear in the society as Chinese. You know, you would not find an essentialist racist establishment doing that. You would not find that type of attitude among the Nazis with respect to Jews, for example, or not even just Jews, gypsies and blacks and everybody who was seen as a subhuman. Right? You would never find that. You would never find, for example, in the American racist system, any kind of accommodation for, let's say, you know, dissolving into the melting pot as a mixed race person and who is a true American. You never find that, you know, because you have the one drop rule in America. Very, very interesting thing, one drop rule. You know, so a person could look, to all intents and purposes, white on the outside. If it is proven that they have that one drop rule, you know, they are considered to be black. You know, I used to, in the time of apartheid in South Africa, I used to enjoy reading in the newspaper how many white people were reclassified as colored, which meant mixed race, which is a term that, and a class that they invented. You know, and how many colored people became black or were assigned as black. You know, racism could be that crazy. And this is something I'd like to mention. You know, apart from the fact that Allah has created race, it is true. You know, it has the differences in our languages and our colors. These two things are the essence of race, languages and colors. Because languages tell you what your roots are. Okay, it tells you what your roots are. You know, this is why, for example, you have one kind of common language between Western Europe, or Europe in general, I believe, Europe in general, and India. They call it Indo-European languages. Okay, Europe just wants to separate itself from the rest of Asia, of which it is part, by a river. You see, so this is the situation that we find ourselves in, where, for example, you know, the presentation of the history of mankind is done in a Eurocentric manner. You know, so if you ask, and this is one of the myths that they had perpetuated, if you asked what is an African civilization, most people will say they don't know. Most people in the world will say they don't know. Right? Most non-African people, and a lot of African people too, I would say African people on both sides of the Atlantic, would say they don't know. And it's staring them right in the face. It's staring them right in the face. All right, that place is Egypt. Egypt was an African civilization, 100%. You know, even its mode of inheritance or its mode of succession to the throne was through the female line, matrilineal, just like the rest of Africa, not patrilineal, which characterizes the Middle East. And so within this context, I mean, even you find cinematographic depictions of Egypt, ancient Egypt, by Middle Easterners, like by Iranians and Iraqis and so forth. It is always a white Egypt. And the only black people you see in that Egypt might become some servant or you know, or some slave fanning the pharaoh when they sat. And when you read the history, the Islamic history of Egypt, right, the religious history of Egypt, you would see that, for example, the pharaoh, the family of the pharaoh was called Qibti. And Qibti was almost synonymous with the word black. You know, that Moses was adopted into Pharaoh's family, for example, you know, not as some white Semitic baby, you know, into the Pharaoh's family, but because as some hadith describe Hazrat Musa as being tall, lanky, and of curly hair and quite dark, so he could fit in with the family. But a lot of these things are being hidden from us right in front of our eyes. When you look at, you know, the artifacts around King Tut, you know, and you see that mask, that beautiful golden mask with those thick, you know, African lips staring out at it. You know, you can only get that kind of lips in Europe with Botox, or not Botox, sorry, with lip fillers or things like that. You know, when you see the wall paintings of the pharaoh hunting and so forth, he is painted as black. But we don't see this because we are subject to a program of taking away from African people their civilization. So the racism of the past, and when I say the past, I mean before the industrial era, before even the mercantile shipping era, you know, the time of like Queen Elizabeth and these people, you know, slavery was an unfortunate circumstance that somebody fell in, that was seen as the same thing from the person who owned the slave to the slave himself, that the person who owned the slave knew that he could himself be a slave of that people whom he has enslaved. This is the possibility. Whereas in essentialist racism, the slave is always of a particular type and is relegated to being a slave. So that's the major differences between the two. But you have had insults levied at people because of their color. Yes, this has happened. I never heard of black people levying in history, in terms of prominent black people or non-white people in history levying classical insults to white people, or thinking that white people are, should be our servants or anything like that. But you have in this kind of essentialist type of thinking, this approach, which is harder to dislodge, of course, by its very nature. And this is the kind of racism that we have to address ourselves to. Somebody talked about or mentioned systemic racism. Systemic racism is this, that despite the claims of a society to freedom and justice, within the machinery of the state, you have elements that keep people out of power and out of finding independence. So, for example, in terms of the liberalization for housing in America during the FDR era, for example, you had city governments at the same time where it made it easier for white people to get loans to buy houses and so forth. It made it difficult for black people to do this, black and maybe Latino people to do this. This is systemic racism. Systemic racism, for example, is the kind of beneficent type of attitude towards a black person by trying to cater to their lowest needs, or based upon the lowest expectations you have of them. This is systemic racism. So I think to fight systemic racism, one has to go on the inside first and find out what one's attitude towards racism is, if one is racist or not. How does one see a particular people? And then when one discovers what is ever in oneself, then one can learn to fight it on the outside. What we can do about the racism today, I think we have an obligation to do something about it. I think we need to go back to this understanding of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, as an example, one of the things that he was most proud about in his youth was joining the Hilful Fudul. Hilful Fudul, the compact, the agreement of the Fuzul, of the righteous, meaning a meeting that, or a promise that a group of young men of Mecca in the time of the Jahiliyyah pledged to defend the rights of strangers from being defrauded in Mecca. And he joined this organization. He didn't even form it, he joined it. And he was most happy to do that. And if you look at it, these guys, these other people who are the members of that HILF, of that compact, they weren't Christians, they weren't Muslims, because Muslims as a denomination didn't exist at the time. They were just people who had a sense of justice. They were people who practiced idolatry, and maybe might have had some of the faults of the idolaters. But in this case, he joined this movement, he joined this organization to make a change in society. This teaches us that we can do the same thing in our society. That we can put aside certain differences that we might have with people and organize with them for the common good of the society. This is what his sunnah is actually telling us. So what we can do for this, I believe we should be able to read. We should read. We should read. We should study this. You want to make a change in society, you need to study and be aware of different ideas and ideologies. I mean, for example, I'm not giving you any kind of value judgment here, but you know where I stand. You know, the Black Lives Matter is basically a lesbian organization that does not really have much place for heterosexual Black males in its organization. So it is, it's an LGBT plus organization, and its primary aims are for LGBT plus issues. We need to know what we're getting into. Now they have a discrepancy now between Black Lives Matter as a quote unquote movement. I say quote unquote movement because that's the name of the organization, which is the LGBT plus organization. You know, you have Black Lives Matter as a slogan, see? And you have to understand what the dynamics between those two are. So you have to be able to study and to be able to talk with people, which means you have to get information, which means you should read more. Talk with others who are interested in the same thing as you. Talk with others. Keep your cell phone camera, you know, ready to draw when you see an incident of police brutality taking place in front of your eyes. Interact with Black people, very, very important, especially for us, you know, middle class Shia people. We might be even scared to do that. How do I find a Black friend? You know, find one, you know, reach out to people, you know, and get to know them. Right? Get to know them. Of course, you meet many idiots. You know, a lot of people who don't have a clue. But that's all right. You keep searching. You meet some people, you know, and you could know more from them. There's a Black students organization on a campus, for example. Reach out to them too. Now, I tell you something. A lot of these Black campus organizations are party organizations. Largely, they don't know much. Okay, they're at a party. That's it. Nothing wrong with joining them. You don't have to party with them, but try to get them to think a little more seriously. And one of the ways that you're going to help them is every October, there's Black History Month. There's Black History Month. And any organization could put something on for Black history. Here would be a good opportunity for those who might be going to university next year. Hopefully if coronavirus is not here, you know, we could organize some kind of Black history talk. You know, I'm at your service, of course. You have to pay for my transportation. You know, but you know, the other sheikhs like this who also can talk. Sheikh Zakaria is also quite interesting. Has interesting views and so on. You know, you can do this. I think you can also take fuller action. I think, you know, for example, there are Black Lives Matter meetings taking place all around the city. You know, get to find out where they are, who they are, to insert yourself in there. At the moment, I would not worry about them being a Black Lives Matter as a quote unquote movement, being a lesbian organization, because I believe what is happening is going beyond Black Lives Matter. In fact, they are afraid to show their true colors on the outside, you know, but I think you should participate in this. It's like, again, joining the Hilful Fudul. You know, these Meccans probably used to eat, these young men used to probably eat pork and swear and maybe drink, who knows what they did, okay? But that was beside the point. they saw some injustice in society and they wanted to change it. And our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as a young man, joined it. And as an older man, he said, this is the thing I was most proud about. So this is what we have to do. You know, you can join these organizations, you can take them over. And many of these organizations in the 60s, you know, how were they destroyed because they were taken over by the FBI. You know, I would rather some smart Shia brother or sister take it over. It doesn't really matter if you're like non-black. You know, they'll love you anyway. Black people are not as exceptionalist as white racists. I think, you know, where you start is you start from yourself, as I mentioned before. You know, then you start at home. You continue at home, being sensitive to what you could perceive as racist attitudes. You will hear them from time to time, not just about black people. You know, you hear them about Pakistanis, you hear them, you know, you hear them about Iraqis, you hear them about Iranians, you hear them from, in every different group you go, you might hear some kind of condescending remark about people. You know, do not tolerate this. This is an act of arrogance and supremacism over somebody. Do not tolerate this. You see, so I think you should keep that in mind, and don't show yourself as being angry or, you know, flustered or have some kind of, or self-righteous type of an attitude. No, right? Just be a little firm. Just draw somebody's attention to it. Be humble about it, you know, and call it out for any time it shows up. Another thing that many of our young people can do, because I mean, again, most Shia young people are very studious, you know, looking to make it into university, are in university and so on, is to organize a self-empowerment for many of these deprived kids. You know, like for example, in education, they might need some extra tuition, you know, or tutoring to get over in their school and so on. You know, you can help them with this. And you at the same time, you could teach them in the process things like social love and responsibility and things like that. These are the things that make people like you as a Muslim. You know, you go out there and you find people from these communities, even in their own school. Ask your little sister or little brother who's still going to high school. You know, any black kids who are having trouble at school, who's having difficulties in getting through their classes and so forth. Things like that. So these are many of the things that you can do. I think, for example, you know, you can organize demonstrations in your own area. You don't have to wait for Black Lives Matter to organize a demonstration. Who gave them the sole right to do this? You can organize a demonstration and you will have Black Lives Matter all over the place. You don't care. It's a slogan, but you organize a demonstration. These are some of the things that you can do. Watching the educational establishment is very important, I think, you know. Watching how police treat people, minorities and so forth, it's very, very important. You know, things like that are very important for us to move forward. Okay, I think I'll stop here for now and we take whatever questions that people might have or comments. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi. Thank you very much. Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Rather, thank you very, very much, Sheikh, for your discussion. Inshallah, we'll continue for the next. Inshallah, well, we do have 40 minutes or so. And we do actually have some questions from last week as well. And just to remind everyone that is currently in the Zoom session, please do ask your questions either by raising your hand, at which point we'll unmute you, or through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. So the first question is, how do we hold to account scholars and speakers who have said things that could be deemed anti-Black? Doing this in the past has been tricky and fallen on deaf ears.
I think, you know, you should speak with them in private, okay, to maintain their dignity, right? You speak to them in private, you know, and tell them what it really means. I think a good example is the case of Joan, as I mentioned before, the case of Joan. You have a scholar on top of a mimbar, and he's recalling the case of Joan. And the case of John it has already been disproven that this person did not really exist. He's really a hybrid of a number of different personalities put together, you know, and it is a racist approach to showing how Islam is inclusive, or the followers of Imam Hussein is inclusive. That even somebody as low as a slave like John, you know, could be exalted to the rank of the followers of Imam, the martyrs who died for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You know, and John Howe describes himself in such demeaning terms, and these are basically stereotypical terms in terms of smelling badly, you know, and you know, how black skin being an aib or being a deficiency and so forth. You know, to us, when we see this, we see somebody who is a black person who is wallowing in self-hate. This is what we see. We don't see somebody noble. We do not see somebody noble. Okay, I'm telling you that from now. Okay, we see a black person who is wallowing in self-hate. And that person cannot fight for anybody. This is what we see. Okay, so it's kind of tricky sometimes. But I think, you know, I have to talk with them, you know, personally. You know, you keep talking with them until they can understand something.
Sheikh, thank you very, very much. The next question is, please can you recommend some books with regards to understanding racism and racism-related discourses, i.e. the authentic history of Black people?
Maybe what I can do is I can send you a list by WhatsApp, because if I call them out now, you know, some people will be too busy writing and forgetting what I said and all of that. So in the next couple of days, I will send you a list of books by WhatsApp, and you can pass it out to people who are being involved.
Inshallah, that's a great idea. Thank you very, very much. So inshallah, everyone, we'll try and send out an email to those that have registered for the course, or for the series rather, and then inshallah, this will help to consolidate your knowledge from the series as a whole.
A good book to start with, I believe, is The Autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley. I think you should read that book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Why it's a good book to start with? Because he is what we would call, in America sometimes, we call him a Shahid al-Awwal, or first Shahid. He's the first Muslim, African-American convert Muslim who died a martyr fighting systemic apartheid racism in the United States of America. You know, and I think if you read his book, you'll be empowered by his life. I think that's a good book to start with. He's a Muslim like us, and he has a very, very good synopsis on racism. The rest of it I'll send you all, inshallah. Send it to Brother Kazim, or Brother, the IUS brother.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sheikh. Okay, and one other question, I think perhaps links kind of into the topic in general, and perhaps more into kind of last week's discussion, is how can you get people from different ethnic backgrounds to assimilate when you have general events? I assume by general events, just, you know, like a mix of ethnicities and in a multicultural center or setting.
I don't get the question. Is it how do you get people to assimilate when people are in a multicultural setting?
Yeah, rather, I would assume, rather than kind of people maybe have the tendency to stick within their cliques of ethnic groups.
Yeah, well, I think the question is rhetorical. The question is rhetorical. If you don't have that type of ethno-friendly environment, you cannot create unity among ourselves. You know, we cannot integrate among ourselves. You know, and I think this is where our Shia organizations are. Okay, they are basically ethnocentric organizations that are open to other people from its faith to attend, even Sunnis, but who don't own the place, right? They don't own the place. They're not part of the family. You know, the family is offering a service to you, but you're not part of the family, right? And I think these organizations might think that this is invisible, but it is felt by people, you know. And I really don't know how people in our community would get over that. I think you get over that maybe as our community starts to integrate with each other on a natural level, because natural integration that is now taking place, of course. You know, we could promote integration, but we also have natural integration. You know, as our youth grow up in the society and become more and more British, as opposed to being more and more hyphenated, you know. And more common action to future, you know, high earners, young high earners, and so forth, will be the ones who will be, you know, building the new masajid and the new Islamic centers and so on. You know, you find a different dynamic taking place, you know.
Thank you very, very much, Sheikh. So there are a couple of questions kind of related to the Black Lives Matter movement and the relationship between Black Lives Matter and Islam. And so I'll just kind of try and summarize the two comments or questions that are here. So the first one is, do you still recommend getting involved and partnering with the BLM movement and other organizations against racism that do not take an Islamic approach? And the other comment, which has been sent to me, was sort of one brother or sister, I'm not actually sure which, unfortunately, but an Arab Muslim living in England that has experienced a lot of Islamophobia and has the motivation to want to join the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you think that there is a lot of common cause between you know, these different types of racism and discrimination, whether that be Islamophobia, Black Lives Matter? There's a lot of parallels that I've also seen that have been drawn between Black Lives Matter and even the struggle for Palestinian liberation as well. Do you think we should sort of be working together here in terms of tackling institutionalized racism in our society?
Yeah, one beautiful question. And another question, like if they weren't listening to anything I was saying, the first one, okay? This person is asking me, you know, what about those organizations that are not on an Islamic path, basically, you know, but want to do something about social justice, all right? This is the question you're asking me, right? What if they're not on an Islamic tip? Or what if they're not on an Islamic path, these people? I had drawn your attention to the example of Hilful Fudul, a time when there was a Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah. You know, these are people who would dance naked around the Kaaba. These kinds of people, right? You know, these kinds of people would bury their daughters alive, all right? You know, these are kinds of people who like booze and drinking and getting drunk and fornicating and so on. These were that kind of people. And among these people were these youth who decided, you know what, let's try to help people in this particular area, a particular area. Maybe they couldn't help people in any other area. Everybody that needed help. And the Prophet joined them. How more graphic can we get? Please, and you're asking the same question. How more graphic can we get? Now, the other one I think is excellent, a beautiful question, right? And that question is this, you know, aren't there examples, aren't there commonalities between, for example, Islamophobia, the racism against Islamophobia, against Muslims and Islamophobia, okay, and against Black people and so forth? Yes, there are. The Palestinian issue, yes, there is. Palestine is basically an Aryanist project. It's an Aryanist project. You know, the very founders of Zionism, you know, Theodore Herzl and others, you know, presented their case to the British colonialist regime that their presence in Palestine will further European civilization. It's there. And those people in that land Okay, because of the fact, this is the reasoning that they would give everywhere from South America to North America to the Caribbean to Africa, you know, and that these people who are there are less entitled to that land because we can do more with that land than them. These people are uncivilized. When the people in Palestine, they had their poets, they had their culture, they had their way of life. It's the same Aryanist project. You know, it doesn't matter what the Aryan calls themselves, okay? You know, they might call themselves a German, you know, they might call themselves an Afrikaner, you know, or you can call yourself a Zionist settler. Doesn't make any difference. It's the same thing. Exactly. And this is why I think that we should be present at these types of demonstrations as a group, and that we should try to establish or start events like this ourselves. When we, for example, have, the Quds Day, right? We could invite people, non-Muslims, to Quds Day who are, you know, insistent upon liberation and who are fighting oppression. We can do this. You know, or even for Ashura or Arba'in. To show that Imam Hussein meant liberation for all oppressed people. And so therefore all oppressed people should be part of his caravan and be marching down the street together with us. Yes, sir. And maybe some of them might want to dance, you know, out of joy because they're part of a liberation thing. That's their problem. That's their issue. You can tolerate that kind of stuff. You know, and we can explain to people, it's okay. But we should be the centers of social awareness and social liberation in our societies.
So that was very, very beautifully put, especially when you brought in kind of our commemorations of Ashura and Arba'in and how our school very much revolves around social justice and the social justice that the Ahlul Bayt stood for. So another question is linked on to what you mentioned a bit earlier about the story of John in Karbala. And the sort of specific question is how it may have been fabricated and then how it was disproven in terms of this particular narrative.
Well, Sister Amina In-Laws wrote a very interesting thesis upon this. And I think you can get it online. Just type in Amina In-Laws, INLOES, and I'm sure you'll find it. If not, you can ask Brother Kazim, I'll send it for you. But don't ask me to send it first.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I actually have a question myself, and it kind of has with regards to sort of like I did part of my degree was history at university, and you discuss, you know, a lot of the different colonialist projects that were pursued by you know, Britain and the European powers in Africa, in the Middle East, in India, Pakistan, and kind of what has become of those countries today, and the various you know, the wars and the chaos and the political struggles and whatnot. You often hear, you know, the notion of reparations, that the West should be paying reparations, for example, to African Americans because of the difficulties and the trials that we can't even describe, really, that their ancestors endured. I mean, you know, and there is a bit of a dilemma here because you've got like British Muslim youth like myself that are, you know, embedded within Western society, that are in many ways proudly British, but then at the same time you also have, you know, past government policies and also present government policies that are clearly racist politicians as well, that are aimed at subjecting, you know, kind of, you know, this Orientalist view, that are aimed at subjecting foreign peoples to this sort of racism. So, I mean, what's your take on that in terms of, you know, the responsibility of different governments in the past and in the current day? Do they have some responsibility for something like reparations, for example? And how do we within ourselves address this particular conflict or dilemma as well?
Yeah, well, I think as long as those companies like Barclays, like Lloyd's, for example, are continuing to exist and have made billions on slavery, as long as they continue to exist as mega corporations, they better pay reparations. As long as we can tally the advancements that have been made in Britain because of slavery, that people today are enjoying, while at the same time in Ghana, kids are still walking bare feet where these slavers used to capture their prey. As long as this is taking place, we require reparations. Reparations is, look, right now, Germany is paying reparations to Israel. I don't believe there's any time limit on this. Okay, it's almost 100 years. It's almost 100 years. You know, slavery in the West ended in, British slavery ended in like 1835. So we're talking about just over 200 years ago. You have people who were in chains and then they are freed with nothing, being forced to go back to the same plantations looking for work because there's nothing else available for them. You know, people whose families have been traumatized, people who have been torn away from their mother country and are somewhere in a limbo between being a Western person and an African slave. That's what creates all these problems in society. Yeah, I think we could say that reparations should not be given, or if there's a very, very, very long time that has elapsed between, let's say, for one injustice of one people over another. You know, like Roman massacres in, I don't know, 260 BC of people, you know, or the Scottish people calling for Britain to pay reparations because they killed Braveheart or something like that. I mean, it could vary in the area of the ridiculous, you know, but as long as the effects of this exploitation still exist, as long as those who benefited from it are still among the richest and in the world, yes, we do have a cause for reparations. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sheikh. Okay, I've got another question here. It's actually quite a lengthy one, so inshallah, it's sort of easily understandable. So, Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh, and very unique and insightful lectures you have given, and very thankful for your time. You touched very briefly on the LGBT and Black Lives Matter movements. Of course, there is a common pattern for Muslims, particularly those of South Asian and Middle Eastern backgrounds, to either hold some forms of homophobia and or internal racism within them. However, as you said, the Prophet integrated and joined an organization created by idolaters for social justice and the greater common good. This is also what we should inevitably be doing, as you pointed out within the lecture. How do you suggest encouraging inclusivity in Islam and our roles within these organizations, particularly among our elders, where I see the real challenge is, as some of them would never want to affiliate with such organizations, even if they do share mutual struggles of being marginalized with the Shia. I hope that will make sense.
This one I kind of understand. How do we build inclusivity? That's a good one. All right, how do we build inclusiveness in among the Muslims and so forth? And the person, mentioned things like homophobia and so forth. I am careful, first of all, of accepting words like homophobic and homophobia. Why? I'll tell you why. Because it prepares one psychologically for being singled out or accused of that term in many circumstances where it's not controlled. That term is not controlled. I think it's a vague term, and because of its vagueness, it has a wide application in areas where maybe it should not be applied. I think that when LGBT plus becomes a political issue, it can and it should be open to criticism as a political movement. And at that point, we do not and should not put ourselves in danger of being stigmatized, or labeled as something. Racism is very different to bullying because of one's sexual choices. It's very different to being bullied because of one's sexual choices. Most of the people who have been the victims of racism were never asked what their sexual choices were. They were never asked this. Even a person who might have had a sexual choice outside of the binary norm, okay, or the heteronormative agenda, even those people who are outside of that, if they were guilty, if they were the victims of police brutality, were never asked, and were never attacked, or very rarely were they attacked or oppressed because of that secondary factor. Okay. Should we join organizations that probably could have that agenda? That, let's say, for example, they are one of many groups that are fighting for social justice in a particular area. Of course we do, we can. Of course we can. We might not be on their agenda, but we are fighting for social justice for whatever. Save the whales. Okay, all of us are fighting. No problem. That question comes up, the question about who are we going to include? That is a loaded question because it means that we have the power to include. Okay? If we don't have the power to include and exclude, then we just include ourselves, like as I mentioned before in the first case. But when we have the power to include or exclude, it depends on our tactics, it depends on our strategy, it depends on what we want to achieve. Of course, we cannot exclude certain elements that if we have a Muslim or Islamic agenda, we cannot include certain elements in our organization, okay, because of our morals, which is clear to us. But it does not mean that we cannot join an organization or a coalition of organizations that may have people who might represent ideologies that contradict us on this level. And that's not homophobia. That's just being ideologically pure, I guess. Because you're committed to a particular way of action and you're running the show.
Thank you very, very much, Sheikh, for clearing up what's actually a huge, obviously, discussion. And inshallah, maybe in the future we can have further discussions on that particular topic as well. So Brother Ayman Al-Diwani has his hand raised. So inshallah, Brother Ayman, please feel free to ask your question to the respected Sheikh.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, Kazim. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh, for the very interesting comments and insight that you've been sharing with us. So I'll purposely, it's probably a bit of a controversial question, but I suppose it's just a challenge. So obviously the movement, the Black Lives Matters movement, the sort of the uproar that we've been seeing around the world is pushing and sort of the social norms or what is acceptable. But then just to sort of counter that, what would you say to the idea that, whether it's just a sort of a hype at the moment, and that, maybe a few weeks or months from now, it'll all be forgotten and everyone will just go back to their norms, and specifically thinking about, whether it'll cause real change, especially if we look at, the leadership of two of the biggest superpowers in the world, i.e. Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, both having a history and current ongoing track record of racist remarks or Islamophobia, how can we expect real change? And whether or not, effectively the protests are potentially even distractions?
Thank you very much for that very receptive question, Brother Ayman. I myself, even though I'm impressed by the demonstrations and I'm impressed by the international scope of them, which tell us something. They tell us that people are prepared to stand up for justice in society. It gave me a kind of hope. It was almost like a sort of a dry run for when the Imam comes and when people all rise up to support him because they're all tired of all of the governmental experiments that they have made and they have come to nothing. You know what I mean? So I was quite impressed by that, but I was also quite suspicious. I'm quite suspicious because I'm asking myself, why is it that from CNN to Al Jazeera to all of the BBC, Sky TV, everybody is taking the knee, and everybody is talking about questions of changing statues and so forth and so on, right? What's wrong? What's up? What's the game? And this is why I think we need to be aware of history. Because I tell you something, there are people, I won't call them the Illuminati, it's too facile, but there are people, groups of people, there are classes of people even, who want to keep the society the way it is and make sure that their flow of money keeps coming. And they know that they have a struggle between the general growth of people's awareness and a way to try to stifle that awareness for them to continue maintaining power. And they do this by distractions, especially by, for example, the music industry, these influencers you have on, Instagram and so forth, how thick you could make your lips by injection and your butt by implants, and these types of things, and get you all obsessed with this type of stuff. You know what I mean? Who slept with who and among the who's who and so forth and so on. So they can get you away by distraction, but they also can get you away by embracing the struggle, embracing the new, to give people a sense of progress, people a sense of achieving something. This is very significant in the Obama years, when Obama, the first Black president of the United States, was brought in. You think Obama represented anything revolutionary? People thought so. And so people looked at the American system and said, this gives us hope. Here we have a Black person who is coming to be president of the United States. But Obama, coming after the most unpopular president and most inefficient president ever, George Bush, was essential to save that imperialist system. What did Obama do? Obama didn't, for example, free all the young Black men who were working as slaves in for-profit prisons in the United States based upon the three-strike rule to criminalize 1 in 3 of every young Black man. He didn't do anything about that. Okay? What Obama did were 2 big things. One is he saved big business by defending them and bailing them out on the basis of too big to fail after the last meltdown. Okay, and secondly, he was the most important promoter of LGBT rights, above that of African American rights, by the way, right, in history. This is Obama. So the system embraces change when it is in their interest, that the change that they embrace now becomes diffused and defanged and therefore harmless. And I think this is the same thing that is happening. For example, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the energy would be placed upon this idea of breaking down statues. This is where the biggest stuff might take place. You know, but what is a pull and a tug, you know, is one is the people's willingness, you know, to stand up and fight when they see something as graphic as a man dying on screen. And the other one is how to get these people away from that path. So yes, I do suspect the embracing of all of this, but I think this could be, with our help and the help of God, of course, something even bigger for those people who think they're in control to handle.
Inshallah, thank you very much, Sheikh. And we have one final question here on the Q&A, and I expect this question will, inshallah, also be tackled next week. We'll be joined by Sister Barak Hussein, psychotherapist, and she'll discuss the psychology and mental health impact of racism. So, Sheikh, just from your perspective, how does one overcome or help others to overcome the traumas of racism?
Well, I think you could do it on an institutional level and on a personal level. On the institutional level, for example, we form organizations, for example, our psychologists or psychiatrists or whatnot, can form organizations, or who are working with organizations, establish a part of that organization to reach out to those people who have been traumatized by, let's say, for example, police brutality or bullying in schools and so forth and so on. And I think we can do this on a personal level. On a personal level, for example, you know, in our masajid, where we have our youth who might be victims of Islamophobia and so forth, that they can reach out for them and help them and so forth. And try to bring these types of groups together, groups of people who have suffered from racist trauma and also from Islamophobic trauma. And try to empower them, you know, try to empower their parents, try to empower parents. A lot of parents, for example, are immigrant parents, their language is not that good, you know, and they feel that they rather stay at home rather than do anything because it's so embarrassing not to know how to speak and so forth and so on. We have to keep these people in mind and to have structures for these people to reach out to us, even in terms of bringing up the children, in terms of education and so forth and so on. These are things, you know. We say charity begins at home. Let's start at home first. Let's start in our own house, you know, making our house open to other people to come in and to find solace. Let's start in our own houses by making them more relevant for the needs of our own community and also by extension then the needs of others, inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, we actually have one final question that's come through on the Q&A, so I'll have to take this as the last one, and then we'll wrap up, inshallah. So again, this is quite linked to what was discussed before about the reconciliation between racism, or rather anti-Black racism and other types of racism in society. So how can we as Muslims get on board this anti-racism momentum to challenge things such as Islamophobia? Because the sister is explaining that as an Arab hijabi Muslim, she's often been victim of a great deal of racism and Islamophobia, in many cases more than any other sort of people that she knows within her circle. So can this be a springboard for us to encourage society to also take Islamophobia seriously, but also to not sort of offend the Black community or look as if we're
you would not be offending the Black community, I tell you. Once you're standing on the platform of another organization or of another cause, you're standing on the platform or supporting the platform of another cause, all right? You do not try to make that cause's platform your own. All right, it's like, for example, we're demonstrating for, let's say, the rights of Palestinians, all right? You know, and some Greeks join who also think, you know, as the Greek Women's League, for example, you know, they support the rights of the Palestinians too, okay? For the Greek Women's League to want to take over the stage of the Palestinian is wrong. You're there as a supporter, all right? And so we could support organizations like this. We could join them by supporting them in that action in whatever area for social justice. All right? But they could support us too. You know, when they come on our platform, they are not expected to intervene. They can come on the stage and give a speech in support of what we are saying. And this is what we mean. You know, and so when you know, Muslims come and join these things, you know, I saw a picture of a Black Lives Matter protest where Muslims, it was time to pray, and the protesters surrounded the Muslims to protect them from any kind of, you know, hostility or whatever, and made these for these people to pray. This is in practice a solidarity with Muslims. When our sisters join with hijab, okay, this is the flag of Islam. People see this. They see Muslims also are sympathetic towards this. They will be sympathetic towards you. Do you remember for the Grenfell fire? You know, when a whole lot of these sisters from the Azhar and Zahra schools went out in the protest, and how they got so many photo ops because they were all in their school uniform. They were in their white hijabs, looked so beautiful. This is what we got to do. That's all we have to do. You know, and this broadens love for us. People come to us, you know, and we speak to them, and then we invite them to our masjid or mosque, and let's hope our mosque and our masjid are willing to receive them.
Sheikh, thank you. That's a truly beautiful way to end. I guess this is a ray of sunshine in otherwise quite testing times, and we pray that Allah hastens the reappearance of the 12th Imam. He'll be obviously the ultimate bringer of all these different forms of justice on earth. Ilahi Ameen. And we pray that our communities, us as individuals, that through these sorts of talks and sessions and through other initiatives as well, are able to bring about justice in society in whichever way that we can, inshallah. Thank you very, very much once again, Sheikh Ahmed Haneef, for joining us over the past 2 Sundays. It's an absolute pleasure for IUS, as always, to have you. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the dear Sheikh the tawfiq to continue to fight for this particular cause and also for other causes, and to continue to impart knowledge on the Shia and the wider Muslim and British community, inshallah. So just to remind everyone else, the third session next week will be with psychotherapist Barak Hussein. The topic is the impact of racism on mental health. It will be, inshallah, an interactive dialogue discussion with an expert in the field. So we do please encourage you to join that. And the final week, inshallah, on Sunday the 2nd of August, will be with Sheikh Ja'far Ladak. The topic will be exploring racism through the Holy Quran and a hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So thank you very much once again, Sheikh Haneef. For those of you that perhaps missed perhaps missed last week's lecture, you can follow that up on the IUS National YouTube channel. For this lecture, if you want to go back or you want to share with anyone else that may be interested, that has also been streamed live and will be kept on our YouTube channel as well, inshallah. We pray that everyone stays safe, and we hope to see everyone else here next week, inshallah. Could we please end with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali